For over 7 decades, Queen Elizabeth II was more than a monarch. She was a symbol of stability, guiding Britain through times of profound change. Her reign stretched across eras of conflict, peace, social evolution, and technological revolution. In a world where the very idea of monarchy was evolving, Elizabeth proved that power could be wielded without politics, and authority could be carried with quiet dignity. Queen Elizabeth II, born Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor, lived a life defined by a remarkable blend of tradition and transformation. Her reign, which lasted for over 7 decades, was not just the longest in British history, but also one of the most consequential. As the head of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth realms, she became a figure synonymous with continuity, steadfastness, and quiet dignity. From the end of the British Empire to the rise of digital media, from the Cold War to climate summits, Queen Elizabeth II remained a constant amid seismic global shifts. The world around her changed dramatically, but she endured, unshaken, unwavering, and uniquely timeless. Her public presence offered reassurance during uncertain times. She became a symbol of national unity and moral guidance, standing above politics, even as prime ministers came and went, and as generations turned over. In times of crisis, such as wars, economic downturns, or national tragedies, her calm demeanor and carefully measured words were often a source of comfort to millions. Her Christmas broadcasts, a fixture since the early years of her reign, became moments of reflection for a nation and the Commonwealth. It is in this blend of personal poise and institutional resilience that her legacy rests. Queen Elizabeth II didn't merely witness history. She became its most elegant thread, stitching together the many eras of the 20th and 21st centuries. Her impact extended far beyond British shores. Through her stewardship of the Commonwealth and her countless state visits, she fostered diplomacy, understanding, and a quiet but powerful sense of global belonging. Her image, serene and stately, became one of the most recognized and respected in the world. She embodied not just monarchy, but a unique kind of moral authority, one rooted in service and sacrifice. Elizabeth's story begins long before she took the throne. Born on April 21, 1926, in a London townhouse at 17 Bruton Street, she arrived into a world that didn't anticipate her destiny as queen. She was the first child of the Duke and Duchess of York, later King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. Her birth, while celebrated, did not carry the weight of a direct heir to the throne. At the time, her uncle, Edward, Prince of Wales, stood in direct line, and it was widely assumed he would marry and produce heirs of his own. Thus, Elizabeth was raised in a quieter, more insulated royal environment, where her early years were shaped more by family warmth than the burdens of future rule. Her lineage was no less royal for this uncertainty. The House of Windsor, newly named by her grandfather King George V in 1917 during the First World War, replaced the Germanic-sounding House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. It was a symbolic transformation, aligning the monarchy more closely with British nationalism. Elizabeth, as a Windsor, was raised with an appreciation for duty, tradition, and the subtle responsibilities that came with royal blood. Her family was close-knit, and her early life was not marked by the grandeur often associated with royalty. Instead, she experienced a relatively simple, if still privileged, childhood, one where her parents focused on providing love and a moral framework rather than ceremony. The interwar years, during which Elizabeth grew up, were complex and often tumultuous. Britain, still reeling from the aftermath of World War I, faced political upheavals, economic challenges, and the shadow of growing European tensions. Though she was shielded from the harsher realities of this period, Elizabeth's childhood was undoubtedly shaped by the social and cultural climate of the time. The royal family, seeking to reassert its relevance and maintain public affection, began to adopt a more relatable image, one that included family life, domesticity, and visibility among the public. Young Elizabeth would often accompany her parents on public appearances, and her quiet, thoughtful demeanor captured the hearts of many. Education for Elizabeth was unorthodox compared to other children of her age and rank. She did not attend a traditional school. Instead, she was educated privately at home by governesses and tutors. Her chief governess, Marion Crawford, played a significant role in shaping her intellect and character. Elizabeth studied a broad range of subjects including history, literature, language, and music. Emphasis was also placed on constitutional law and statecraft, a reflection of her family's growing awareness that Elizabeth might, in fact, one day become queen. Her instruction was complemented by close relationships with her parents, who modeled public service and moral integrity. The Queen Mother, in particular, was a strong influence on Elizabeth, nurturing a deep sense of duty and faith. From a young age, Elizabeth showed a natural sense of composure, observation, and an earnestness that belied her age. She was serious, disciplined, and notably self-contained, qualities that would become her hallmark as queen. Yet, she also possessed a strong sense of curiosity, especially about animals and the countryside. Horses and dogs, particularly corgis, were lifelong passions. Her love for animals was not merely a pastime, but indicative of a gentle, empathetic nature. These interests helped shape the future queen's relatable image. Though monarch, she was also a woman who found peace in the rhythms of nature and in the company of animals. Perhaps one of the most enduring relationships in Elizabeth's early life was with her younger sister, Princess Margaret, born in 1930. The bond between the two was close and affectionate, though their personalities differed markedly. Elizabeth was reserved, careful, and dutiful. Margaret was spirited, artistic, and extroverted. Together, they formed a contrasting but complementary pair. Their childhood, spent between London and the family's country estates, was filled with shared routines, performances, and imagination. As war approached in the late 1930s, the sisters found themselves increasingly in the public eye, symbols of innocence in a country bracing for turmoil. Their bond was tested and strengthened during World War II, a period that dramatically reshaped both their lives and Elizabeth's path to the throne. With the abdication of her uncle Edward VIII in 1936, her father unexpectedly became King George VI, thrusting Elizabeth into direct line as heir presumptive. This singular event irrevocably altered the course of her life. From that moment onward, Elizabeth's upbringing was no longer that of a minor royal, but of a future sovereign. The quiet childhood had given way to constitutional destiny. Elizabeth's formative years prepared her in subtle and profound ways for the unparalleled life that lay ahead. Even before she wore the crown, she had absorbed the values of discipline, discretion, duty, and devotion. These were not just royal ideals, but deeply personal ones, instilled by loving parents and shaped by a generation that had known war, hardship, and rebuilding. She emerged from childhood and adolescence with a clear sense of purpose and a temperament uniquely suited to monarchy. In a time when many questioned the relevance of the crown, Elizabeth would become its finest justification, not through grand gestures, but through a life quietly, consistently, and faithfully lived in service of her people. This early phase of her life is foundational not only to understanding the woman she became, but also the queen she was destined to be. Elizabeth's story, beginning in the drawing rooms of pre-war London, unfolding through the dramatic reshuffling of royal succession, and maturing in the crucible of wartime Britain, sets the stage for the longest and one of the most respected reigns in world history. It was not simply a journey from cradle to crown, but the evolution of a figure who would carry the hopes, history, and heart of a nation for over 70 years. The young princess who once looked with wide-eyed wonder at her world would become the queen who inspired steadfast devotion from millions, an enduring icon in a world forever in flux. When World War II broke out in 1939, Britain was thrust into a conflict that would test every element of its national identity, spirit, and resilience. It was a war not only of military might, but of social endurance. And in that climate, every symbol of stability became precious. The royal family, especially the young Princess Elizabeth, quickly became such a symbol. At just 13 years old, Elizabeth found herself growing up under the looming shadow of global conflict. Yet even in these early years, she demonstrated a precocious sense of duty and responsibility that foreshadowed the queen she would become. Her parents, King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, made a deliberate choice to remain in London during the Blitz rather than seek safety elsewhere, believing that their presence would lift national morale. This decision set the tone for how the royal family would function during the war, as visible embodiments of British courage and unity. Elizabeth and her younger sister Margaret were initially relocated to Windsor Castle for their safety, but their removal from London was more pragmatic than escapist. The public still heard from them, most famously in 1940 when a 14-year-old Princess Elizabeth delivered her first radio broadcast on the BBC's Children's Hour. Speaking calmly and eloquently to children who had been evacuated from cities to the countryside, Elizabeth expressed empathy, hope, and reassurance. It was the beginning of her public voice, a voice that would carry through decades of national addresses and crises. As the war dragged on and its impact deepened, Elizabeth's role evolved. No longer just a child figurehead, she began taking on more serious responsibilities. Her keen interest in the military and in the daily life of her people was evident. In 1945, at the age of 18, Elizabeth joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service, ATS, the women's branch of the British Army. This move was more than symbolic. It was a genuine step toward active participation. She trained as a driver and mechanic, learning to change tires, dismantle engines, and navigate military vehicles. The sight of the future queen in overalls, working under the hood of a truck, struck a chord with the British public. She became the first female member of the royal family to serve in the armed forces full-time, earning the rank of honorary junior commander. Her wartime service was brief but meaningful, not because of its duration, but because of what it represented: solidarity with the people, a breaking down of barriers between monarchy and subject, and a genuine commitment to national effort. This period of wartime service was transformative for Elizabeth, not only in terms of public image, but on a deeply personal level. The war years matured her quickly. She was not sheltered from the realities of loss, fear, and uncertainty that defined this era. Her letters from this time, many written to family and close friends, reflect a growing awareness of the world's complexities and the gravity of her future role. It was also during this time that her relationship with Philip Mountbatten began to take shape. The young naval officer, 5 years her senior and of royal lineage himself, born Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark, had been introduced to Elizabeth in the mid-1930s, but it was during the war that their bond deepened. Their correspondence became frequent, and Elizabeth reportedly kept a framed photograph of him in her room, even as he served abroad in the Royal Navy. The conclusion of the war in 1945 brought with it a collective sigh of relief, but also the enormous task of rebuilding a wounded nation. In this post-war climate, the engagement of Princess Elizabeth to Philip Mountbatten was more than a royal romance. It became a symbol of renewal. The announcement of their engagement in July 1947 was met with widespread public enthusiasm. Though rationing was still in effect and the economy was fragile, the royal wedding in November 1947 was a moment of national joy and optimism. It was broadcast to millions by radio and filmed for cinema screenings around the world. Elizabeth wore a gown designed by Norman Hartnell, for which she collected ration coupons like any other citizen. The ceremony, held at Westminster Abbey, was both steeped in tradition and infused with the spirit of a new beginning. Their marriage was rooted in deep affection and mutual respect, but it was not without its complexities. Philip, upon marrying Elizabeth, renounced his Greek and Danish titles and became a naturalized British citizen. He adopted the surname Mountbatten from his maternal family and was granted the title Duke of Edinburgh. Though these gestures were seen as necessary for his integration into the British royal family, they came with personal sacrifices. Philip's naval career, in which he had shown great promise, was effectively curtailed as he took on the role of royal consort. His role was ill-defined and often marginalized, and he struggled in the early years to find his place within the institution of monarchy. Still, he remained a loyal partner to Elizabeth, providing strength and companionship in the face of the immense pressures that her future would bring. Balancing personal life and royal responsibility was never going to be simple. Elizabeth and Philip began their married life, living in relative modesty compared to the grandeur that would later surround them. For a time, they lived on the island of Malta, where Philip was stationed with the Royal Navy. These were perhaps the happiest and most normal years of their marriage, a brief window during which Elizabeth could experience life as a naval officer's wife rather than as the heir to the throne. Their time in Malta allowed them a level of freedom and intimacy that would become increasingly rare as Elizabeth's public duties escalated. As their family began to grow, with the birth of Charles in 1948 and in 1950, the young couple continued to represent a new modern face of the monarchy. Yet behind the scenes, the demands of royal life began to mount. King George VI's health had been in decline since the late 1940s, and Elizabeth increasingly undertook more royal duties on his behalf. Philip, meanwhile, faced a delicate balancing act: supportive consort, husband, father, and modern man in a traditional institution. He modernized aspects of the palace, pushed for reform in royal administration, and instilled a more efficient structure to the running of the royal household, all while navigating the challenges of being second in command to a wife whose every move was scrutinized by press and public alike. Elizabeth's sense of duty, shaped by war and strengthened by marriage, would eventually call her to a role that would define the rest of her life. The death of King George VI in 1952, while Elizabeth and Philip were on a royal tour in Kenya, marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of a new historic reign. Yet it's impossible to understand the queen she would become without examining the foundations laid during these critical wartime and post-war years. The princess who joined the military and addressed children in their time of fear had grown into a young woman of steel resolve and moral certainty. And beside her stood a husband who, though often behind the scenes, provided unwavering support in what would become one of the most complex and enduring marriages in modern history. The transformation of Elizabeth from wartime princess to sovereign was not just a personal evolution. It mirrored the transformation of Britain itself. From the ashes of global conflict, a new world order was emerging, and so too was a new kind of monarch. Elizabeth's early adult life, defined by service, love, sacrifice, and adaptation, set the tone for a reign that would span centuries, continents, and crises. She had proven her loyalty to her people not just in her words, but in her actions, in uniform and in marriage, and it was this authenticity that would anchor the trust and admiration she would carry for the next 70 years. The story of Queen Elizabeth II's ascension to the throne is both poignant and profound, a convergence of national expectation and personal sorrow, unfolding at a moment when the world was on the brink of immense change. In 1952, the sudden death of King George VI marked not just the end of an era, but the beginning of one of the most iconic reigns in modern history. For Princess Elizabeth, who was just 25 years old at the time, the transformation was instant and irreversible. The weight of the crown, both symbolic and real, fell upon her shoulders without warning. King George VI, Elizabeth's father, had never expected to be king himself. Thrust into the position after the abdication of his brother, Edward VIII, in 1936, George VI led Britain through World War II and became a steady symbol of resilience during one of its darkest periods. However, the pressures of kingship, coupled with a heavy smoking habit, began to take a toll on his health. In the final years of his reign, his declining condition became increasingly apparent. He underwent surgery to remove part of his lung in 1951 and never fully recovered. As his public appearances dwindled, Elizabeth began to take on more royal responsibilities, often standing in for her father at state functions, tours, and meetings with dignitaries. In early 1952, Elizabeth and her husband, Prince Philip, embarked on a royal tour of the Commonwealth, with stops planned in Kenya, Australia, and New Zealand. On the morning of February 6, 1952, while staying at the Treetops Hotel in Aberdare National Park, Kenya, Elizabeth received the devastating news of her father's death. He had died in his sleep at Sandringham House, a quiet and dignified end to a life of profound duty. The shock was immense. She had gone to bed as a princess and awoke as a queen. It is said that when her private secretary broke the news, she stood silent for a long moment before asking what name she would reign under. Her response was simple and direct. Elizabeth, of course. That one sentence conveyed both her clarity and her commitment. The journey back to Britain was somber and symbolic. On arrival, she was met by Winston Churchill, the then Prime Minister, and other senior members of the government. The nation entered a period of official mourning. Despite her personal grief, Elizabeth immediately stepped into the role expected of her. Her sense of duty, formed in childhood and solidified during the war, now took on its full dimension. As she greeted officials and addressed the nation, the grace with which she carried herself became apparent to all. It was the beginning of a reign that would be defined by unwavering service, but it was also a moment of deep loss. She had lost not only her father but also her anchor, mentor, and guide. The period between her accession and her coronation was filled with both personal adjustment and intense preparation. The Queen moved into Buckingham Palace, began regular meetings with government officials, and began the delicate process of shaping her reign. The image of a young woman in mourning taking on the responsibilities of a global monarch captivated the public imagination. In this period, the Queen also leaned heavily on Prince Philip, whose presence provided continuity, support, and a semblance of normalcy. Philip, who had given up his naval career to be by her side, became her closest advisor, confidant, and partner in navigating the challenges that lay ahead. The coronation of Elizabeth II took place on June 2, 1953, at Westminster Abbey, and it marked one of the most significant events in 20th-century British history. It was not just a religious ceremony or a moment of pageantry. It was a powerful symbol of continuity, tradition, and modernity all at once. The event was broadcast live on television for the first time, reaching an estimated global audience of over 20 million. For many, this was their first glimpse into the rituals and symbolism of monarchy, and it created a connection between the crown and the people that was unprecedented. The decision to televise the coronation, though initially controversial, proved to be visionary. It allowed people not just in Britain but across the Commonwealth and the world to feel included in the moment. Homes across the UK gathered around small black and white screens, often with neighbors and extended families, to watch the ceremony unfold in real time. Every aspect of the coronation was steeped in ancient tradition. The service itself, led by the Archbishop of Canterbury, included the anointing with holy oil, the presentation of the regalia, and the oath in which Elizabeth promised to govern her people with justice and mercy. Yet despite the weight of history, there was something fresh and forward-looking about the event. The presence of women peers participating in the coronation, the multicultural delegations from across the Commonwealth, and the young age of the Queen all pointed to a new era. It was a moment when monarchy, so often seen as outdated, managed to rejuvenate itself. Elizabeth, regal and composed, conveyed dignity and strength beyond her years. Public expectations in the aftermath of the coronation were monumental. Post-war Britain was still recovering from the devastation of conflict. Though victory in 1945 had brought pride, the years that followed were marked by economic hardship, decolonization, and a redefinition of Britain's place in the world. Against this backdrop, the Queen was seen as a figure of hope and stability. She represented a link between the past and the future, a monarch raised in wartime but now guiding a nation in peace. The challenges she faced were formidable. The British Empire was transitioning into the Commonwealth, a group of independent nations with shared history and values, but often divergent interests. Navigating this transformation without the appearance of decline or defeat was a task that required immense diplomatic skill. Elizabeth's youth was both an asset and a challenge. On one hand, it brought energy and modernity to the monarchy. On the other, it raised questions about experience and preparedness. Some critics wondered if she would be able to assert herself among older statesmen and foreign leaders. But these doubts were quickly dispelled as the Queen embarked on a series of tours and engagements that demonstrated her command of royal protocol, her keen intellect, and her sincere interest in the lives of her subjects. Her Commonwealth tour in 1953–54, which lasted 6 months and took her to 13 countries, solidified her image as a global monarch. From Canada to Australia, from Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, to New Zealand, she was greeted by cheering crowds and heartfelt welcomes. She made a concerted effort to learn about the cultures, traditions, and concerns of the people she visited. It was during these early years that her reputation for diligence and attention to detail was established. But beneath the surface of public admiration was a quieter, more personal reality. The Queen was still mourning the loss of her father. The pressures of her role often left little time for reflection or solitude. Her schedule was relentless, and the expectations upon her seemingly endless. Yet she never allowed her private grief to impede her public duties. Her stoicism became a hallmark of her reign, a quality that some interpreted as emotional reserve, but which, in truth, was rooted in a deep sense of service and personal discipline. This ability to separate the personal from the public would prove to be one of her greatest strengths over the course of her life. One of the most significant aspects of Elizabeth's early reign was her ability to project a modern monarchy without undermining tradition. She embraced technological advancements such as radio and television to communicate with her subjects. Her annual Christmas broadcasts became cherished national events, offering words of reassurance, reflection, and unity. At the same time, she remained deeply committed to the spiritual and ceremonial duties of her role as defender of the faith and supreme governor of the Church of England. This dual commitment to innovation and tradition helped the monarchy maintain relevance in an increasingly secular and skeptical world. In the immediate years after her ascension, the Queen also had to contend with major political transitions. Winston Churchill, who had guided Britain through the war and was now nearing the end of his political career, remained an influential advisor. Their weekly meetings, which began with some awkwardness, evolved into a relationship of mutual respect. Churchill, despite his own formidable stature, came to admire Elizabeth's sharp memory, her balanced judgment, and her quiet strength. Over the decades, she would go on to work with 14 more prime ministers, each bringing new challenges and dynamics to her role as constitutional monarch. Perhaps the most defining quality of the Queen's early reign was her ability to inspire trust. In an age where institutions were increasingly questioned, she became a constant, unchanging in her principles, yet flexible in her approach. Her silence on political matters was not a void, but a deliberate act of restraint, which gave her moral authority above partisan debate. While elected leaders came and went, the Queen remained, providing a sense of continuity that became increasingly rare in a rapidly shifting world. Her early reign was not without its missteps or controversies. The complexities of royal finances, the question of media intrusion, and the challenges of maintaining relevance in an age of cultural revolution would all come to the fore in later decades. But in these formative years, Elizabeth II established the foundations of what would become the longest reign in British history. She had not sought the throne, nor had she expected it so soon, but when the call came, she answered with grace, determination, and an unwavering sense of purpose. The ascension of Queen Elizabeth II in 1952 was more than a change of monarch. It was a defining moment for Britain and the Commonwealth. It marked the transition from imperial power to global partnership, from post-war austerity to a new modern age. In stepping into her role with quiet confidence, Elizabeth reassured a nation and inspired the world. Her coronation the following year was not simply the crowning of a queen, but the beginning of an extraordinary journey, one that would span decades, generations, and dramatic global transformation. At its heart was a woman shaped by duty, tested by loss, and elevated by the unshakable bond between sovereign and people. The 1950s and 1960s were decades of profound transformation for Britain and the wider world, and Queen Elizabeth II's early reign coincided with this complex, transitional era. The end of the Second World War had left Britain victorious but weakened, its economy strained, its infrastructure damaged, and its empire beginning to unravel. As the new monarch, Elizabeth became a figure of continuity amid sweeping societal, political, and global changes. Her presence offered a sense of stability and reassurance during a time when Britain's role on the world stage was being redefined. Though her constitutional powers were limited, her influence, symbolic and diplomatic, was undeniable. Britain's post-war recovery in the 1950s was marked by both optimism and austerity. Rationing, which had been a wartime necessity, continued into the early part of the decade, and the country grappled with shortages, unemployment, and the need for large-scale reconstruction. Cities like London, Coventry, and Liverpool bore the scars of the Blitz, and housing shortages were acute. The government launched massive building projects, both to replace bombed-out homes and to provide for a growing population. The welfare state, introduced under the post-war Labour government, continued to expand, offering healthcare, education, and social services to citizens in a way that fundamentally reshaped British society. In this context of reconstruction, the monarchy took on a new dimension. Elizabeth's image was everywhere, on coins, stamps, banknotes, and in newspapers, representing not only the continuity of tradition but also the promise of a rejuvenated Britain. Her public engagements were carefully choreographed to showcase both the enduring dignity of the crown and the forward-looking spirit of the nation. She visited new housing estates, factories, hospitals, and schools, reinforcing the notion that the monarchy was deeply connected to the everyday lives of her subjects. These acts were not mere ceremony. They served as a reminder that the monarchy, while rooted in history, was actively engaged in the present. But while Britain was looking inward to rebuild, it was also being forced to confront its waning influence abroad. Nowhere was this more apparent than in the Suez Crisis of 1956. This event marked a pivotal moment in British foreign policy and underscored the decline of imperial power. When Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, a vital shipping route controlled jointly by Britain and France, Prime Minister Anthony Eden launched a military response in coordination with France and Israel. The invasion was meant to regain control of the canal and topple Nasser, but it was poorly planned and executed. More importantly, it provoked a severe backlash from the United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Nations. The Queen, as a constitutional monarch, did not intervene in the decision-making process. However, the crisis unfolded under her reign and would forever be associated with the changing status of Britain on the global stage. The political fallout was immense. Eden was forced to resign, and Britain's reputation as a world power suffered a serious blow. The Suez Crisis revealed the extent to which Britain had become dependent on American approval and marked the beginning of a new geopolitical reality in which the US and the USSR were the dominant global actors. For Elizabeth, the event reinforced the importance of diplomacy, subtlety, and the limits of old-world imperial thinking. The most profound and far-reaching change of the period, however, was the process of decolonization. During the 2 decades following World War II, dozens of former colonies in Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean gained independence. This was a process already underway when Elizabeth ascended the throne, but it accelerated dramatically during the 1950s and 60s. In many ways, she became the monarch of a vanishing empire, yet she handled this transformation with a remarkable ability to adapt and evolve. India had already gained independence in 1947, but other nations soon followed. Ghana in 1957, Nigeria in 1960, Kenya in 1963, and a wave of Caribbean states through the 1960s. Rather than resist the tide of independence, Elizabeth and her advisors sought to reframe the narrative. These were not seen as acts of retreat, but of partnership. The creation of the modern Commonwealth of Nations offered a structure through which former colonies could remain connected to Britain and each other, bound not by imperial control, but by shared values, history, and aspirations. Elizabeth played a central role in shaping and strengthening this new Commonwealth. She made it clear from the beginning that her commitment to these nations extended beyond political obligation. She genuinely valued the diversity, culture, and contributions of each member state. Her tours of the Commonwealth were extensive and often grueling. She visited remote villages, danced with tribal leaders, spoke with children in schools, and walked through markets, engaging with ordinary citizens as much as with heads of state. These visits were more than symbolic. They were acts of diplomacy and cultural bridge-building that helped ease the transition from empire to association. In Ghana, her 1961 visit carried immense political weight. At the time, Ghana was navigating Cold War tensions and considering alignment with the Soviet bloc. Queen Elizabeth's decision to dance with President Kwame Nkrumah during a state banquet sent a powerful message. It was a gesture of equality and goodwill, an assertion that the Queen recognized the legitimacy and dignity of the new African leadership. The image of the Queen dancing with a black African president captured headlines around the world and illustrated how soft power could be wielded effectively, even in post-imperial times. At home, reactions to decolonization were mixed. Some Britons mourned the loss of empire, associating it with diminished national prestige. Others embraced the new multicultural identity of the Commonwealth. The Queen walked a fine line, expressing appreciation for the contributions of colonial subjects while never appearing nostalgic for empire. Her speeches consistently emphasized themes of unity, mutual respect, and cooperation. In doing so, she helped reorient the public narrative. The idea of a Commonwealth family emerged, diverse but equal, united not by domination but by choice. The Queen's personal diplomacy extended into her relationships with other world leaders. She developed rapport with presidents and prime ministers from across the Commonwealth and beyond. Her familiarity with global politics, while never expressed overtly, was well known among diplomats and statesmen. She read daily briefings, consulted closely with her foreign secretaries, and kept meticulous notes of her meetings. Though she never publicly voiced opinions on political matters, her institutional memory and personal wisdom made her a valued advisor behind closed doors. The 1960s brought further changes to British society. It was a decade of cultural revolution, marked by new music, fashion, and a questioning of traditional values. The Beatles, the sexual revolution, the rise of youth culture, and the civil rights movements in both Britain and the United States created an environment of intense social dynamism. The monarchy, seen by some as an anachronism, had to adapt to remain relevant. Queen Elizabeth responded not by altering the core of the institution, but by modernizing its image. Televised royal events, including the investiture of Prince Charles as Prince of Wales in 1969, allowed the public to feel more connected to the royal family than ever before. The 1969 documentary Royal Family offered an unprecedented glimpse into the domestic lives of the Queen and her relatives, humanizing them and reinforcing their role as national symbols in a rapidly shifting culture. Throughout this time, the Queen remained deeply committed to her role. Her schedule was demanding. State visits, diplomatic receptions, ceremonies, military inspections, garden parties, and countless meetings. She continued to travel extensively, not only within the UK and the Commonwealth, but to countries such as Germany, France, and the United States. Her presence, always composed and dignified, projected a sense of continuity. In moments of uncertainty, she became a touchstone, a reassuring presence above politics. Internally, the monarchy was also adjusting. The royal family had to balance tradition with modern expectations. Queen Elizabeth's approach was characterized by quiet reform. There were subtle changes in the way honors were awarded, in the accessibility of royal events, and in the transparency of the institution. Though many of these shifts were gradual, they signaled an awareness that the monarchy could not afford to be stagnant. Change had to be embraced thoughtfully and strategically. By the end of the 1960s, Britain was no longer the imperial power it had once been. Its colonies were now independent nations, its economy was struggling to compete globally, and its society was undergoing dramatic cultural changes. Yet through it all, the monarchy had endured, and more importantly, evolved. Queen Elizabeth II stood at the center of this evolution. Her reign had begun in the twilight of empire, but was now firmly rooted in a new vision, one of unity, diplomacy, and service. The Winds of Change speech by Prime Minister Harold Macmillan in 1960, addressing the South African Parliament, encapsulated the spirit of the time. Acknowledging the unstoppable momentum of decolonization, the speech aligned with the Queen's own stance, reinforcing Britain's shift from ruler to partner. Though the Queen herself did not author policy, her presence and actions supported the broader transformation of Britain's global identity. As Britain turned toward Europe and the United States in its foreign relations, the Commonwealth remained a cherished project of the Queen. She saw in it not a substitute for empire, but a new community with the potential to foster peace, cooperation, and understanding. Her efforts laid the groundwork for its continued survival and relevance into the 21st century. By the close of the 1960s, Queen Elizabeth II had emerged as more than just a monarch. She was a symbol of dignity, resilience, and adaptability. Her reign had weathered crises, both at home and abroad, and had overseen one of the most significant geopolitical transformations of the modern age. Where once she had been a young queen thrust unexpectedly into power, she was now an experienced sovereign who had navigated the storm of empire's end and emerged not diminished, but redefined. Her ability to evolve without losing the essence of the monarchy ensured that she remained not just a witness to history, but an active and influential part of it. In the latter half of the 20th century, Queen Elizabeth II and the British royal family found themselves navigating a world that was increasingly defined by mass media, shifting public expectations, and political upheaval. The image of the monarchy, once protected by layers of tradition and deference, was now thrust into the public eye in ways that no previous generation of royals had experienced. As cameras became ever-present and journalism increasingly invasive, the House of Windsor was both romanticized and scrutinized like never before. It was during these decades that Queen Elizabeth II had to skillfully balance the old and the new, managing the public role of the monarchy with the private realities of family life under the relentless gaze of the modern world. The media age changed everything. As television sets became a fixture in most homes across the United Kingdom and beyond, the royal family shifted from being distant figures on postage stamps to people who dined, smiled, traveled, and grieved in front of the lens. This visibility brought a newfound intimacy between the public and the monarchy. While this closer connection helped maintain the monarchy's relevance in a rapidly changing society, it also meant that the family's missteps were subject to open commentary and critique. Princess Margaret, the Queen's younger sister, became one of the first royal figures to experience the double-edged nature of media fascination. Known for her glamour, beauty, and charismatic presence, Margaret captivated the public in the 1950s and 60s. But her personal life, particularly her ill-fated romance with group captain Peter Townsend, became a lightning rod for scandal and controversy. Forbidden by royal protocols and church doctrines to marry a divorced man, Margaret's heartbreak became public drama. Her later marriage to Anthony Armstrong-Jones, which ended in divorce, only further fueled the tabloids. Her social circle, often comprised of artists, bohemians, and celebrities, contrasted sharply with the formality expected of the royal household. While Margaret never shied away from her role, her turbulent private life highlighted the growing tension between the rigid expectations of royal duty and the desires of individuals within the monarchy. As the public consumed stories about Margaret's lifestyle, romantic escapades, and personal struggles, it became clear that the institution of the monarchy would no longer be shielded from the very human stories unfolding within its walls. The Queen, while always composed and reserved, had to contend with this shift. She understood that to maintain the monarchy's relevance, there had to be a conscious effort to modernize, but that modernization could not come at the cost of dignity or continuity. Walking this fine line became a defining feature of her reign. Meanwhile, the Queen herself remained a paragon of steadiness. Unlike the more expressive or controversial members of her family, she exuded restraint, protocol, and grace. However, her children were growing up in a world where the rules were changing, and the media's appetite for personal drama was insatiable. Increasingly, the Queen found herself not just as a monarch, but as the matriarch of a family under siege by public opinion. The press, once deferential to royal privacy, began to dig deeper. Tabloid journalism exploded in the 1970s and 80s, and the lives of the royals were splashed across front pages with relentless fervor. Everything from fashion choices to rumored feuds to marital woes was dissected for public consumption. Yet the Queen maintained her distance from controversy. Her ability to remain composed in the face of such relentless exposure was both admired and criticized. For some, her stoicism was a symbol of her strength. For others, it was a sign of emotional remoteness. Amid this backdrop of personal challenges and media spectacle, the 1970s and 80s brought with them broader societal upheavals that tested the very fabric of British life. Economically, Britain was beset by crisis after crisis. The country faced inflation, high unemployment, widespread strikes, and a loss of industrial power. The so-called Winter of Discontent in 1978-79 saw widespread strikes by public sector workers, creating a sense of national despair. The Queen, though constitutionally neutral, represented a figure of unity during these troubled times. She continued with her engagements, offering a symbol of endurance and continuity when few other institutions felt reliable. In 1977, Britain celebrated the Queen's Silver Jubilee, marking 25 years on the throne. The event offered a moment of collective reflection and national pride. Festivities were held across the UK and throughout the Commonwealth. Millions gathered to watch the Queen and Prince Philip travel the country. Street parties, pageants, and ceremonial displays brought communities together, lifting national morale during an otherwise bleak economic period. The Jubilee reaffirmed the monarchy's enduring place in British identity. While critics questioned the cost and relevance of the monarchy, the sheer public turnout and emotional response demonstrated that Elizabeth II still commanded deep respect and affection. The 1980s ushered in a new era of political and cultural transformation under Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. Known for her conservative economic reforms and combative political style, Thatcher's tenure changed the trajectory of British politics. Though both women were among the most prominent figures in the country, their relationship was complex. Thatcher was the first female prime minister, and her strong-willed leadership often clashed with the Queen's preference for discretion and quiet diplomacy. Public speculation about tensions between the Queen and Thatcher made headlines, particularly regarding issues such as South African apartheid, where the Queen's commitment to the Commonwealth and racial equality reportedly contrasted with Thatcher's reluctance to impose sanctions. However, the Queen remained true to her constitutional role, never publicly expressing her opinions or undermining elected officials. Her weekly audiences with the Prime Minister were private and never disclosed, though it was widely understood that these meetings were more than ceremonial. Behind closed doors, the Queen offered insight, counsel, and the weight of historical memory. While she never challenged Thatcher's authority, her influence was subtly woven into the fabric of state governance. As Thatcher's economic policies widened the gap between rich and poor, the monarchy itself was not immune to criticism. Some questioned the privilege and wealth of the royal family during times of widespread hardship. Yet the Queen responded with quiet gestures, increased visibility, more public engagements, and an effort to show solidarity with ordinary citizens. Her visits to hospitals, factories, and working-class neighborhoods were not just symbolic. They were deliberate attempts to reaffirm her role as a servant of the people, not just a ceremonial head. Perhaps the most persistent and tragic issue during these decades was the conflict in Northern Ireland, known as the Troubles. Beginning in the late 1960s, the violence between Protestant Unionists and Catholic nationalists claimed thousands of lives over the next 3 decades. The Queen, despite the dangers, made several visits to Northern Ireland. Her presence was a calculated risk and a gesture of peace. In 1979, the conflict struck close to home when Lord Louis Mountbatten, Prince Philip's uncle and a close confidant of the Queen, was assassinated by the Irish Republican Army. The loss was devastating for the royal family, particularly for Prince Charles, who saw Mountbatten as a mentor. Yet, the Queen continued her duties, maintaining her schedule and refraining from public displays of anger or vengeance. Her resilience in the face of personal tragedy reinforced her image as a figure of unshakable strength. Throughout these tumultuous years, the Queen's personal fortitude stood in contrast to the vulnerabilities within her family and the chaos in the nation. Her children, particularly Prince Charles, the heir to the throne, began to experience the same invasive scrutiny that had once plagued Princess Margaret. The royal household, once seen as impenetrable, was now open to analysis, criticism, and even ridicule. Yet, the Queen never wavered in her commitment to her role. Her faith, discipline, and unwavering sense of duty continued to shape her every decision. The monarchy's survival during these decades was by no means guaranteed. Republican sentiments ebbed and flowed, often surging in the wake of royal missteps. But Elizabeth's consistency, her refusal to be drawn into political skirmishes, and her genuine affection for her people preserved the institution. While the world around her transformed, economically, culturally, and politically, the Queen stood as a constant. She understood the power of silence, the value of ritual, and the importance of presence. Whether opening Parliament, attending a state banquet, or visiting a disaster zone, her image conveyed stability. By the end of the 1980s, the monarchy was facing a new set of challenges. The younger generation of royals, raised in a media-saturated environment, began to live out their lives under even more intense public scrutiny. The Queen, now a seasoned monarch, would be tested in ways she had never anticipated. The divorces, scandals, and tragedies that lay ahead would challenge not only her family's public standing, but also the very idea of monarchy in a modern democracy. Yet the foundation she had built, rooted in duty, grace, and endurance, would offer a model of leadership that continued to resonate. In hindsight, the 1970s and 80s were not merely decades of crisis, they were decades of reckoning. Britain was changing, and so was the world. The empire was gone, the economy was in flux, and society was reevaluating every institution, from government to church to monarchy. Through it all, Queen Elizabeth II remained a figure of remarkable continuity. Her reign, increasingly long and complex, reflected both the challenges of her time and the enduring strength of an ancient institution adapting to modernity. She did not cling to power, nor did she seek to reinvent the monarchy. Instead, she nurtured its relevance, shaping it gently, wisely, and with an unwavering belief in its capacity to unite. In doing so, she became not just a witness to history, but one of its most defining figures. In the final years of the 20th century, Queen Elizabeth II faced one of the most emotionally and institutionally challenging periods of her reign. The marriage of her eldest son, Prince Charles, to Lady Diana Spencer was initially seen as a fairy tale union, capturing the imagination of millions around the world. Their 1981 wedding at St. Paul's Cathedral was a global spectacle, with more than 750 million viewers watching as Diana, just 20 years old, stepped into royal life. The Queen, ever composed, watched her heir take a major step toward the future of the monarchy. Yet beneath the grandeur and applause, tensions were already brewing, both personal and institutional, that would eventually erupt into one of the most scrutinized sagas in modern royal history. Diana quickly became a beloved figure, not just in Britain but across the world. Her warmth, empathy, and accessibility contrasted with the formality that had long characterized the royal family. She visited hospitals, hugged AIDS patients, walked through landmine fields in Angola, and comforted the sick and marginalized. Her charisma made her a global icon. While the Queen continued to represent duty, Diana represented emotion, and the media eagerly fed on this perceived dichotomy. The contrast between the approachable, emotionally expressive princess and the stoic, reserved monarch played out on television screens and magazine covers for years. But the fairy tale began to unravel. Diana and Charles were increasingly at odds, separated by differing personalities, goals, and the pressures of royal life. Their incompatibility was magnified by the relentless media attention and by Charles's continued closeness with Camilla Parker Bowles. By the early 1990s, the cracks in their marriage were undeniable. Public appearances became strained, private arguments spilled into the press, and the monarchy's internal struggles became tabloid fodder. For the Queen, These developments were deeply troubling. Not only was her family being publicly dissected, but the future of the monarchy was being questioned. In 1992, a year the Queen famously referred to as her annus horribilis, multiple royal marriages were unraveling. Princess and divorced. Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson separated amid scandal. Windsor Castle caught fire. And Charles and Diana's very public split dominated headlines. The Queen, though personally distressed, remained outwardly calm. Her focus remained on preserving the dignity of the institution while trying to manage the emotional fallout behind palace walls. The eventual divorce of Charles and Diana in 1996 was painful but necessary. However, it did not resolve the public fascination with Diana nor the tensions within the royal family. In August 1997, the world was stunned by the news of Diana's death in a car crash in Paris. She was just 36 years old. The tragedy triggered a wave of global mourning rarely seen in modern history. Flowers blanketed the gates of Kensington Palace. Crowds wept in the streets. Television broadcasts ran non-stop tributes. And yet, Buckingham Palace was silent. The Queen, at Balmoral with her grandsons Prince William and Prince Harry, maintained a private stance in the days following Diana's death. Her instinct was to shield the boys and allow them to grieve in peace. But the public, fueled by grief and media commentary, interpreted the royal family's silence as cold detachment. The Queen's flag did not fly at half-mast. No public address was made. The absence of visible mourning sparked a rare backlash against the monarch herself. It was a defining moment. The Queen, ever attuned to the national mood, recognized the need to adapt. She returned to London, viewed the sea of tributes outside the palace, and addressed the nation live, a rare and powerful gesture. In her speech, she acknowledged Diana's exceptional qualities and the public's sorrow, speaking, "As your queen and as a grandmother." The decision to bow her head as Diana's coffin passed by was both symbolic and healing. With that gesture, the Queen reaffirmed her connection to the people, showing that even the monarchy could evolve. In the aftermath, the monarchy underwent a quiet but significant transformation. Public relations became more strategic. Engagements became more personal. The palace adopted a more accessible tone. While maintaining the core values of continuity and tradition, Queen Elizabeth began guiding the monarchy toward a new model of openness and responsiveness. The relationship between the royal family and the media was re-evaluated, and future generations of royals were encouraged to maintain a healthier balance between public service and personal life. As the 21st century dawned, Queen Elizabeth II stood as a living bridge between the old world and the new. She had reigned through decolonization, the Cold War, economic upheavals, and technological revolutions. But now the monarchy faced new challenges: globalization, digital communication, and generational shifts in public values. Rather than resist change, the Queen began embracing it in subtle but meaningful ways. The Queen's Golden Jubilee in 2002 marked 50 years on the throne. Coming just months after the death of her sister Margaret and her mother, Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother, the Jubilee was imbued with both celebration and reflection. Despite a nation still reeling from royal turbulence in the 1990s, public support surged. Tens of thousands gathered for concerts, parades, and commemorations. The Queen toured the United Kingdom and Commonwealth, reaffirming her commitment to service. What could have been a quiet milestone became a moment of national renewal and appreciation for her steadfast reign. In the decade that followed, the Queen modernized the institution not by dramatic reform, but by carefully allowing it to grow with the times. She embraced digital media, launching the royal family's official website and later social media accounts. Televised speeches, live-streamed events, and virtual engagements became part of royal protocol. These changes were not mere gimmicks. They reflected a deeper understanding of how people connect in the modern age. The Queen, a figure born in the age of telegrams and radio broadcasts, had become an icon in the digital era, her speeches shared across platforms, her presence still commanding reverence. The 2011 wedding of Prince William and Catherine Middleton marked a significant turning point. Their romance, relatively free from the scandal that plagued Charles and Diana, was seen as a fresh start. Catherine, though a commoner, brought poise, warmth, and intelligence to her role. The Queen gave her blessing and took an active interest in guiding the couple. Their union symbolized the monarchy's capacity to adapt while preserving its mystique. William and Catherine's accessible yet dignified approach to royal life was in line with the Queen's long-term vision: service without spectacle, tradition with humility. The Queen's Diamond Jubilee in 2012, celebrating 60 years on the throne, solidified her status as a global figure of endurance and integrity. Events were held across the Commonwealth, showcasing the institution's continued relevance far beyond the British Isles. Despite her advancing age, the Queen maintained an intense schedule, determined to fulfill her duties. The pageant on the Thames, with thousands of boats sailing past her in tribute, was a poignant spectacle. In her later years, the Queen increasingly delegated responsibilities to her children and grandchildren, especially Prince Charles, who began assuming more ceremonial duties. However, she remained deeply involved in all major decisions and events. Her mastery of symbolic leadership, knowing when to speak, when to remain silent, and how to project strength without dominance, was unmatched. Her Platinum Jubilee in 2022 marked 70 years on the throne, an unprecedented achievement. By then, Queen Elizabeth II had become not only Britain's longest-reigning monarch, but one of the most respected and recognizable figures in the world. The celebrations reflected more than longevity. They were a tribute to endurance, consistency, and quiet leadership. Her public appearances were fewer, but each one was deeply meaningful. When she appeared on the Buckingham Palace balcony, frail but smiling, it was a reminder of how much history had passed under her reign and how gracefully she had borne its weight. Throughout the early 2000s and 2010s, the Queen continued to navigate a complex and evolving family dynamic. The abdication of royal duties by Prince Harry and Meghan Markle in 2020, dubbed Megxit by the press, sparked another period of intense public and media debate. Though the Queen expressed sadness, her response emphasized unity, dignity, and understanding. She allowed them space to define their own path while maintaining the monarchy's values. Her ability to absorb such personal and institutional shocks without overt drama was a testament to her unique blend of discipline and empathy. The Queen's approach to modernity was never flashy or revolutionary. It was rooted in the belief that institutions must reflect the people they serve. Rather than reshape the monarchy overnight, she permitted gradual adaptation. From loosening court protocol to permitting royal marriages based on love rather than politics, to embracing diversity within the Commonwealth. Her modernization efforts were subtle, but they were also strategic and lasting. Even in her final years, the Queen remained a symbol of calm amidst uncertainty. As Britain faced challenges such as Brexit, the COVID-19 pandemic, and political instability, her Christmas broadcasts and public messages offered comfort and perspective. In 2020, during the height of the pandemic, her address to the nation, invoking the spirit of wartime unity, resonated deeply. "We will meet again," she said, echoing the Vera Lynn song of the 1940s. In a world filled with anxiety and fragmentation, her words were a salve, a reminder of shared experience and collective strength. Ultimately, Queen Elizabeth II's reign was a masterclass in balancing tradition with progress. She managed crises with poise, guided generations of royals with patience, and embodied the values of service, sacrifice, and resilience. From the tumultuous years of Diana's death to the triumphs of her Platinum Jubilee, she remained steadfast. Her quiet revolution reshaped the monarchy not through radical reform, but through the power of example. As a woman who devoted her life to her country and her people, she transcended the role of monarch to become a timeless symbol of stability in a turbulent world. The year 2021 brought Queen Elizabeth II one of the most poignant and personal losses of her life: the death of her husband of 73 years, Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. Their marriage, forged during the uncertainties of post-war Europe, had been a bedrock of emotional support and partnership throughout her reign. Philip was her closest confidant, a man who walked one step behind in public, yet stood as an equal beside her in private. His death at the age of 99 marked not only the end of an era in royal history, but the conclusion of an extraordinary companionship that had shaped the monarchy for nearly a century. The Queen's response to Philip's death was marked by the quiet dignity and emotional restraint that had come to define her reign. At his funeral, seated alone in St. George's Chapel due to COVID-19 restrictions, the image of the Queen in black, veiled and socially distanced, became an enduring symbol of both personal grief and national loss. There were no grand speeches or dramatic displays, only silent mourning and a public face of resilience. Her solitude mirrored that of millions who had also lost loved ones during the pandemic, and in her grief, the Queen found a renewed connection with her people. Her public statements following his death acknowledged his strength, humor, and service, but above all, his irreplaceable role in her life. She described him as her strength and stay, a testament to the depth of their bond. That same year, Queen Elizabeth faced the unprecedented challenges brought about by the global COVID-19 pandemic. Her leadership during this period was striking in its calm and composed clarity. While world leaders grappled with uncertainty, misinformation, and public unrest, the Queen offered a sense of steadiness rooted in experience and perspective. Her broadcast to the nation in April 2020 was only the fifth special televised address of her reign outside of her annual Christmas messages. In it, she invoked the spirit of the Second World War and reminded citizens that better days will return. These words were a balm to a country gripped by anxiety and isolation. Her speech did not focus on authority or command but on comfort, unity, and hope. In the months that followed, she continued to adapt to the new world brought by the pandemic. At a time when the monarchy might have seemed out of touch with remote work and virtual events, the Queen began conducting Zoom meetings and digital engagements. From virtual science awards to conversations with healthcare workers, she embraced technology not for convenience, but as a way to remain present. These efforts demonstrated her commitment to public service in even the most adverse circumstances. Despite the challenges, the Queen maintained a full schedule, attending events as her health allowed. Her Platinum Jubilee in 2022 marked 70 years on the throne, an unprecedented milestone that no British monarch had ever reached. The celebrations spanned the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth, with concerts, parades, and street parties uniting people of all ages. Though her appearances were limited due to her frailty, each moment she participated in was met with overwhelming affection. She appeared on the Buckingham Palace balcony during the Trooping the Colour, waved to crowds, and even delighted audiences with a surprise sketch alongside Paddington Bear, showcasing her playful wit and enduring appeal. The Platinum Jubilee was not just a celebration of longevity, but a tribute to her consistency, her grace, and the affection she had cultivated over decades. Unlike many monarchs whose power was defined by conquest or reform, Queen Elizabeth's influence stemmed from her unwavering presence. She had been the backdrop to history, a silent witness to revolutions, crises, and cultural shifts, and through it all she had endured. But even as the world celebrated her legacy, the Queen's health was clearly declining. In the final months of 2022, her public engagements became fewer, and her statements more reflective. When she met with Britain's new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, at Balmoral Castle in September 2022, the nation noted the physical frailty of a monarch who had once symbolized robust endurance. Just days later, on September 8, 2022, Queen Elizabeth II passed away peacefully at the age of 96. The announcement of her death sent shockwaves across the globe. Though her passing was not unexpected, the reality of a world without Queen Elizabeth felt unfamiliar, almost unthinkable. She had been queen for so long, 70 years, that multiple generations had never known another sovereign. She had been a constant presence in public life. Her image on coins, stamps, and banknotes, her speeches broadcast across decades, her face lit by fireworks on Jubilee nights. National mourning was immediate and profound. Flags were lowered to half-mast, bells tolled, and tributes poured in from every corner of the world. People queued for hours, even days, to pay their respects as she lay in state at Westminster Hall. The solemnity of the proceedings was matched only by the depth of the public's grief. From veterans to school children, from politicians to street vendors, the tributes all carried a common thread: gratitude for a life devoted to service. World leaders paid homage, reflecting on the Queen's significance not only as a monarch, but as a moral compass in an age of uncertainty. U.S. presidents, European heads of state, Commonwealth leaders, and even figures from countries without monarchies acknowledged her unique place in global affairs. Her funeral at Westminster Abbey was one of the largest gatherings of world dignitaries in recent history. In that final ceremony, filled with both grandeur and simplicity, the Queen was honored not for the power she held, but for the integrity with which she wielded it. Queen Elizabeth's legacy is multifaceted. In Britain, she redefined the role of monarchy in a modern democracy. She served not as a ruler in the political sense, but as a living symbol of continuity, unity, and stability. Her reign spanned 14 prime ministers, countless social transformations, and seismic shifts in the national and international order. Yet through it all, she remained above politics, offering a steady hand in times of both triumph and turmoil. Across the Commonwealth, her influence was even more nuanced. As the British Empire gave way to a more cooperative association of nations, the Queen played a pivotal role in transforming former colonies into partners. She visited over 100 countries, making her the most widely traveled head of state in history. Her presence in places like Canada, Australia, India, Nigeria, and the Caribbean was not merely ceremonial. It was emblematic of a shared past and a vision for a collaborative future. Her speeches during these visits were always carefully worded, respectful, diplomatic, and often filled with subtle acknowledgement of the complex histories that shaped the relationships. She never imposed. Instead, she listened, she honored local traditions, and she recognized the sovereignty and uniqueness of each member state. This respectful engagement helped maintain the Commonwealth as a voluntary association, one rooted in shared values rather than forced allegiance. The Queen's image became globally iconic, transcending language and nationality. Her silhouette was etched into the very fabric of daily life, on currency, postage stamps, medals, and official documents. No other leader in the modern era has had such a ubiquitous presence, and yet remained so enigmatic. While world leaders rose and fell in the media spotlight, the Queen stood apart, consistent, poised, and dignified. She became not just the face of Britain, but a symbol of steadfastness in an age of flux. Even in countries with no direct connection to the monarchy, she was admired for her discipline, her work ethic, and her sense of duty. In the United States, where monarchy is often viewed through the lens of fascination rather than tradition, Queen Elizabeth garnered deep respect. Presidents from Eisenhower to Biden expressed admiration for her leadership. In Africa and Asia, she was seen both as a figure of colonial legacy and as a model of diplomatic grace. Her ability to remain relevant, even beloved, in such varied contexts was a testament to her unique approach to soft power. Her image permeated culture in ways few historical figures have achieved. She was referenced in films, songs, literature, and art, not as a mere figurehead, but as a personification of endurance and regality. Comedians imitated her voice. Artists painted her likeness. Writers speculated on her inner life. Yet the real Queen remained a mystery to most, reserved, measured, always careful never to let the crown slip. Throughout her life, she championed values that may seem old-fashioned in the 21st century: duty, sacrifice, discretion, and patience. And yet, those very qualities are what earned her enduring respect in a world that often rewards speed and spectacle. She never sought to be popular, but she became beloved. She never aimed for transformation, yet she oversaw it. She rarely shared her private views, and in doing so, became a universally respected figure. In a time when leadership often feels transient, Queen Elizabeth embodied permanence. In her passing, she left behind not only a monarchy but a model. Her legacy will be studied, admired, and debated for generations. Her successors, beginning with King Charles III, inherit more than a throne. They inherit the weight of a legacy forged not through conquest or revolution, but through 7 decades of quiet strength. The Queen's reign was, in many ways, a paradox. She held immense influence without ever yielding traditional power. She was a public figure who maintained a fiercely private life. She was both ancient and modern, a bridge between the Victorian grandeur of her early days and the digital immediacy of the 21st century. Her life was not defined by any single moment, but by the consistency of her presence. In a changing world, she remained unchanged, not because she resisted evolution, but because she guided it with grace. As the world moves forward, the era of Elizabeth II will remain a golden chapter in British and global history. Her portrait may fade from coins, her name from ceremonies, but the memory of her poise, her resilience, and her unwavering sense of duty will endure. She was not just the Queen of the United Kingdom. She was, in many ways, the Queen of the world. Queen Elizabeth II's reign was characterized by her unique role as a constitutional monarch, where she wielded significant influence without direct political power. Her position was defined by the principles of the British constitutional framework, which emphasized the monarch's duty to remain politically neutral while serving as a unifying figure for the nation. Throughout her 70-year reign, the Queen held weekly private audiences with each of her 15 prime ministers, starting with Winston Churchill and concluding with Liz Truss. These meetings were confidential, providing a space for open dialogue between the sovereign and the head of government. The Queen's role in these discussions was not to direct policy, but to offer counsel, encouragement, and, when necessary, caution. This approach reflected the constitutional principle that the monarch has the right to be consulted, the right to encourage, and the right to warn their ministers. Her steadfast commitment to political neutrality allowed her to maintain the trust of successive governments and the public. By refraining from public political commentary, she ensured that the monarchy remained above partisan politics, serving as a symbol of continuity and stability. This impartiality was crucial during times of political upheaval, such as the debates over Britain's membership in the European Union, where her silence underscored the monarchy's role as a unifying institution. The Queen's influence extended beyond the United Kingdom, resonating throughout the Commonwealth and other global constitutional monarchies. Her consistent adherence to constitutional principles served as a model for other nations, demonstrating how a monarch could embody national identity and unity without direct involvement in governance. Her presence at international events and her relationships with world leaders further cemented her status as a respected global figure. Beyond her constitutional duties, Queen Elizabeth II was deeply rooted in personal faith and a strong sense of duty. Her Christian beliefs were a guiding force throughout her life, providing solace and direction during times of personal and national crisis. She often spoke of her faith in her annual Christmas broadcasts, emphasizing themes of reconciliation, forgiveness, and service. The Queen's personal interests offered a glimpse into her character beyond her public persona. She had a lifelong passion for horses, actively participating in breeding programs and attending equestrian events. Her involvement in horse racing was not merely ceremonial. She was deeply knowledgeable and invested in the sport. Additionally, she was known for her love of corgis, a breed that became synonymous with her image. Her sense of humor and resilience were well documented by those who knew her personally. Despite the formality of her role, she was known to be witty and engaging in private settings. Her ability to maintain composure and a sense of normalcy, even during challenging times, endeared her to many and contributed to the public's perception of her as a relatable and steadfast figure. In private, the Queen valued family and cherished moments away from the public eye. Her marriage to Prince Philip was a cornerstone of her personal life, providing support and companionship throughout her reign. Together, they navigated the complexities of royal life while raising 4 children. Despite the demands of her position, she sought to maintain a sense of normalcy within her family, balancing her duties with her role as a mother and grandmother. Reflecting on her 70-year reign, Queen Elizabeth II's legacy is one of unwavering dedication to service, constitutional integrity, and personal resilience. She became an enduring symbol of British identity, embodying the nation's values and traditions. Her ability to adapt to changing times while maintaining the core principles of the monarchy ensured its continued relevance in the modern era. As the nation and the world look to the future, the succession of King Charles III marks the beginning of a new chapter. However, the enduring impact of Queen Elizabeth II's reign will continue to influence the monarchy and its role in society. Her life and service have left an indelible mark on history, and her legacy will be remembered for generations to come.